new cooperation strengthened with the Calais Group of France, Germany, Belgium and the Netherlands and the UK in a series of meetings there. We have a new agreement in place with Germany, which includes the commitment by the German government to change the law around the facilitation of organised immigration crime, effectively allowing law enforcement to take action on the warehouses where we know that boats are being stored in Germany and where we know that the gangs have been really exploiting that loophole in the system. We've also been working closely with Iraq and with the Kurdish regional government, including drawing up new agreements between the UK, France and Iraq and the Kurdish regional government, because we know that a lot of the gangs that are operating in northern France are Iraqi Kurdish gangs that stretch their networks right back to the hills of Kurdistan, and we're increasing the National Crime Agency operations in Kurdistan, in Erbil and in Baghdad as well. So strengthening that operation across the board. Most specifically around France, one of the things we have been looking at in particular is around the maritime arrangements, where we've seen the gangs take advantage of the fact that the current French rules prevent French law enforcement from intervening in French waters. The French Interior Minister and I have both agreed that those rules need to change, and that's why he has instigated this maritime review and is looking at changing tactics, changing operations as a result. We obviously want to see that come into place as rapidly as possible in order to prevent boat crossings in the first place.
Thank you. That's quite a bit on process and quite a bit on what has been done, which is very interesting. And clearly, the last point is well covered in the media at present. So could you really focus a bit more on the question? What do you hope in the future should be done? And tell us about the one-for-one ambition and wider than that. It's a question about your ambitions for the future rather than the record of the past.
So the issues around the maritime review, that is obviously about changing the rules in the future. That is immensely important and is something that the French government are looking at the moment. The next area that we are working to strengthen, where we want the increased operations, is it's effectively a joint law enforcement operations and strengthening those. So we have started sharing far more intelligence on some of the organised immigration crime gang networks with not just France, with Belgium, with Germany, and accelerating that cooperation. We want to strengthen that coordination and also strengthen the work with Europol and with the Europol task forces in order to be able to go after those gangs. On the issues around returns, we've again been looking very widely over a long period of time around how we increase returns, how we ensure we increase returns, for example, to places like Iraq, how we look at some of the work that European countries have been doing around returns hubs, and also how we look at different issues now that we have lost the Dublin agreements that we used to have, and what kinds of additional returns that we could do as part of that process. But that work is still underway. So I understand the questions that you would like to pursue on that. That, again, may have to wait while the additional work we have is underway in how we strengthen those returns and how we strengthen that law enforcement cooperation.
Thank you. Turning slightly to a different topic.
Just Lord Filkin, just before you do, I mean, we're hearing rather a lot of things that are going to happen and things that you're planning to do. But in your thinking about these things, for instance, in terms of the returns of one-for-one, is the negotiation that you're going to have going to be with predominantly France, or are you going to widen that out to other countries who are clearly going to be affected? People return to France, then return back to other European countries where they first came in. I mean, that's all in this work that's going to be done, is it?
Well, with respect, Lord Foster, I think Lord Filkin just said, that's all very well, don't tell me about the things that you've done, tell me about the things that you're going to do. And I think you just asked me a question saying, hang on, you can't tell me about the things you're going to do, tell me about the things that you've done. Right. So I'm very happy to try and answer both sides of the same coin.
Very fair criticism taken, I'd still like an answer.
Indeed. I think, the work we have a lot of work underway with France. We'll set out the conclusions of different pieces of work as we work our way through. We've particularly been looking at the maritime issues, looking at law enforcement issues, and as the French Interior Minister has said some months ago, also looking at different returns arrangements as well. The approach that we're taking on this is we need to go after any different way that we can in order to prevent these dangerous small boat crossings, undermine our border security and put lives at risk. When you see these incredibly overcrowded boats where children get put into the middle of the boats, and we've had children being crushed to death on these boats, we need to look at absolutely every different approach to this, including strengthening the law in the UK, and that means including strengthening the law on endangerment so that we can go after people for these overcrowded boats, through to the new counter-terror powers so that we can investigate, through to new law enforcement cooperation, through to different kinds of returns arrangements, and bearing in mind that we have increased the returns of failed asylum seekers by nearly 30% since the election. So it's looking at the whole range of things that we need to do to prevent small boat crossings, but also to restore order and control to the system.
Okay, thank you. Lord Filkin, I interrupted, I apologise.
Thank you, and I'm grateful for the Home Secretary's help on trying to chair the chair. You'll understand. Home Secretary, turning to a more positive or a more optimistic topic, the youth experience scheme. I think many people welcome this. It's clearly not the full Erasmus, but at least it's a step in the right direction. When do you hope it'll go live?
So there will be a lot of more work to be done on this, and to be developed and negotiated between the UK and the EU. What was set out in the agreement, in the reset agreement, was around having a balanced scheme, which would be effectively time limited and capped, and also would have similar numbers of people travelling in both directions. That work still needs to be taken forward, because it needs to be taken forward together between the UK and the EU. The reset agreement obviously also referred to issues around the channel crossings, and some of that work we're taking forward at faster pace, because some of those security issues are particularly important.
So hopefully by 2026?
I can't set out the timescale at this stage. It will just be work that we take forward with the EU.
That sounds disappointing, but it might be 2027 then, by the sound of it.
I can't set out the timetable at this stage, but I'm sure we will provide regular updates, not just to the committee, but to Parliament more widely.
Well, without being trivial, there did seem to be quite a large distance between the UK position and France and the EU position. Are you optimistic you're going to close those differences?
I think, look, the approach that was set out in the agreement was that this will be something that will be agreed on all sides. Look, we have a different arrangement, don't we? We have different immigration arrangements. We are outside free movement, and we're staying outside free movement. France, Germany, other European countries have a system around free movement. So, of course, there are differences in the ways that we approach immigration system, and there will continue to be so. But the agreement as part of the reset was that the new arrangements would be drawn up to the satisfaction of all sides.
I don't want to press you too far, but we're aware that the world has changed radically in the last couple of years. Clearly, the scale of global security threats, the threats of invasion in Europe, let alone our own economic risks of absolutely flat productivity growth. We know it's essential we get closer to Europe, whether it's on security or the economy. It still sounds as if the machine is still fighting about the detail and the small picture stuff, without really seizing that we've just got to get closer and faster and be better at compromising on both sides. Is that a fair statement?
No, I think the part of what we're all looking forward to today is the President Macron's state visit and his address here in Parliament. That is a sign of the very close cooperation between the UK and France. Certainly the French Interior Minister is the minister I have worked most closely with over the last 12 months. And on the economic side, I think having the trade agreements, the better trade agreements sorted with the EU has been hugely important for the UK and is about how we strengthen those trading relationships as well. So I actually think the big picture that we've seen over the last 12 months is strongly strengthening the UK's role more widely on the international stage. The fact that the 3 trade agreements in place, the fact of the much closer partnership with other countries working more widely, and yes, particularly with our nearest neighbours, where that strengthens our economy, means we can deal with shared challenges around crime, around irregular migration, and in a series of different areas. So I think, look, there's the smaller issues, the individual focused issues on individual policies, where some of those will move at different pace to others. But I think in terms of the big picture, the work the Prime Minister's been doing actually on in those international relations has been incredibly important and really strengthening the UK's role.
Thank you. Last topic from me, if I could. The implementation of the EU's entry-exit scheme and ETIAS. It's great in theory. It's got considerable potential for going wrong and causing quite a lot of distress to UK citizens. I'm sure you're well sighted on these risks. What are you going to do as Home Secretary to try to mitigate them?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of work underway about trying to phase the implementation of some of the EU entry and exit systems to make sure that they are workable. Sima Malhotra, our Minister in the Home Office, has been leading the detailed work around agreement that we secured from the Commission and France for the Port of Dover to open a new coach facility at the Western Docks. Some of those really practical issues that we need in order to be able to manage those border checks away from some of the existing facilities. We've had further agreement on piloting, registering car passengers in different ways. So there's been a lot of work underway, quite detailed work, which I'm very happy to write to you about, or to ask Sima Malhotra to write to you about the detail. What we're trying to do is obviously we have alongside that work around the entry and exit system and trying to ensure that that is phased in a way that is workable, but also as part of the UK-EU reset, the support for e-gates as well, which will also, I think, smooth the passenger journeys into and out of the EU from the UK as well, and that support for e-gates. Alongside that, we're obviously strengthening the digitalisation of our own border for people coming into the UK, not just with the e-gate system, but also with the ETA and with the other e-visa arrangements, making sure we can get that better digitalisation of our own border as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Clearly, in the light of that, you're optimistic it will go well.
I think there are always challenges involving major systems, and we are continuing to work to make sure that systems are in place and to keep that negotiation with other European countries on those.
Just before I bring in Baroness Hughes, Home Secretary, I'm sure you're aware this committee has looked at the issue of EES, ETIAS and our ETA on a number of occasions, obviously disappointed by all sorts of delays. But in relation to what's now been agreed, which is the phased introduction by the Schengen countries, there is contained within it a rule, or an agreement that says that at times of severe congestion, they can actually pause it anyway to ease that particular congestion. My simple question is this: who makes the decision to pause, and what ability do we, the UK, have in those juxtaposed border posts to make the decision to close EES, or will we not?
Well, EES is obviously an EU, it's a Schengen system. It's not our system, It's a Schengen system. I think in practice, though, the French government will not want a situation to build up where there are queues, for example, to Dover or to Calais, because as we know, the nature of the roll-on, roll-off journey is that difficulties on one side of the channel can very, very rapidly escalate to being difficulties on both sides of the channel. So we will need that to work effectively across countries. And we are continuing to engage both with the European Commission and the French government to understand their plans. Clearly, if this is about arrivals at an airport in Spain or in Germany and so on, those will be decisions for those countries. But you're right, the particular arrangements for us are around juxtaposed controls and how that is applied in practice. We are continuing to work with both the European Commission and the French government on how that needs to work in practice. If Simon wants to add anything more on that one.
It'd be very helpful if you got more.
So, I mean, I think the Home Secretary has set it out. I mean, I'm happy to wait for your follow-up. But we've got very close working relationships with the French Ministry of the Interior on this. We're doing that with the Department for Transport this side to make sure we have got the administrative arrangements in place that we need, focused very much on the juxtaposed controls.
Bearing in mind that we very often, in relation to transport going through the juxtaposed borders from the UK to the EU, we have much more information about the build-up of traffic and the potential for delay rather than the delay actually having occurred. And therefore it is really important that we have quite a major say in the decision. I accept entirely what the Home Secretary says, that this is a decision for the EU, and it will be particularly for the French staff operating at the juxtaposed borders. But the more say we can have in making decisions at peak times and times of potential chaos, it would be very helpful. And since we got the French president with us today, a good opportunity to just chat about it, surely.
Tell him.
I don't think they disagree with us on this one. I think this is an area we have a very strong shared interest.
We look forward to hearing more about it in answers to parliamentary questions in our House tomorrow. Baroness Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Home Secretary. I just wanted to focus for a minute on generally on Border Command and Border Force and get your views about whether they both have the capacity and capability to meet the government's aims for migration. And then specifically on Border Force, noting a review and actually evidence to this committee over the last 3 years that's identified significant problems in recruitment and retention, very high turnover of staff, problems with the training. Have those issues in Border Force been addressed? Are they up to a full complement of staffing now? And, what is the situation in terms of that issue of capacity and capability for Border Force specifically?
If I start with the Border Security Command and just update you on that, and then I might also ask Simon to add more detail on the latest in the recruitment for Border Force. The Border Security Command is set up to operate really in the same concept that when we set up the Office of Security and Counter-Terrorism back under the last Labour government, to be an overarching command that brings together all of the different organisations and agencies in the same way that we did with the Office of Security and Counter-Terrorism around countering terrorism 20 years ago. To take the same approach to border security now. So that includes Border Force, but also the National Crime Agency, police forces and so on. So overarching thing. The Border Security Command currently has over 200 people as part of its coordinating function, but obviously draws on the specialist investigators in the National Crime Agency, which we are increasing and recruiting, and also the intelligence officers who work as part of the Border Force as well. So that is how that is operating. And the Chancellor has announced an additional £280 million for the Border Security Command by 28-29. That will increase year on year, and we're already looking at increasing the recruitment this year, both around the Border Security Command and the National Crime Agency. In terms of the Border Force itself, because obviously the Border Force has to deal both with issues around security at our borders and also at just the rapid facilitation of our borders for everybody going on holiday, coming home, coming here as tourists, and so on as well. A lot in those areas, we're doing the shift towards the digital borders, which means that we can better use Border Force staff for that intelligence-led and evidence-based issues around security as well. But I don't know if someone wants to then come in on some of the issues around overall capacity for the Border Force.
I want to pick up those issues of security in a minute, but if you could deal with
Yes.
the issues about recruitment, retention, and whether there is a full complement of staff and what the turnover is at the moment.
Yeah, so I mean, in short, there is a full complement of staff in Border Force at the moment. Over the course of recent years, we have grown Border Force quite considerably.
Is it about 10,000 now?
Yes, bit over 10,000 at the moment, actually, nearer 11 at the moment. Some of that growth has been driven by the growth in the Small Boats Operational Command, which is a part of Border Force organisationally, which essentially didn't exist about 3 years ago, and has grown to around 600 people, as well as growth in other parts of the Border Force. So that recruitment has gone well. We've recruited from a range of different backgrounds, including taking on quite a large number of apprentices across Border Force, as well as people from other roles, both in the Home Office, wider government, and beyond. I mean, as with any big frontline operation, particularly a lot of Border Force work is shift work. There is some churn as people's lifestyles change and that sort of thing, but actually nothing particularly out of the ordinary, and we have maintained that complement. I'm afraid I don't have with me the precise churn rate, but we can certainly provide that to the committee.
You let me know that. Are you assured that though you're not losing a lot of people early on, so you've got a kind of fairly high proportion of inexperienced people who are staying a short time?
Yeah, no, I'm assured about that, and indeed the current Director General of Border Force has been in his role for 3 years. We've got a set of very experienced directors and deputy directors beneath him.
And the training?
So a wide range of training across Border Force that takes place, both as people first join and training throughout. So as well as training in terms of the operations, we do regular training on health and safety and such things. And then for particular teams, for example, teams doing goods searches in the backs of lorries, there are particular training that we carry out on a regular basis. There's a team at the centre of Border Force that maintains that and makes sure we are doing what we need to.
Thank you. Home Secretary, you mentioned increasingly using technology to help with the security aspects of the Border Force's work. Just two questions here, please, if you may. What's the focus on preparing the Border Force staff, training them, in other words, to be able to use those digital technologies effectively? And secondly, whilst there's obvious benefits to that, it has been put to us in evidence that there is a potential danger that as the kind of automation and pre-clearance of arrivals particularly increases through this digital technology focus, there's a danger of losing the ability of officers on the ground using their intelligence to be able to intervene when they are suspicious of people arriving. Do you have any concerns about maintaining the right balance on that?
Well, you're right that we're effectively training people to almost play different roles.
Yeah.
If some of the routine checks can be done, whether that is by e-gates, by the having the ETAs, the ETAs, and e-visas, so you can do a lot of those security checks upstream. It's effectively pushing some of the border security checks further upwards, further outwards. then that means you can also then deploy trained officers more effectively to spot when there is a problem. And that might be issues around children, for example, safeguarding issues around children. It might be issues around trafficking. It might be issues around stronger customs searches, for example. It might be other areas where I'm just identifying where there seems to be a problem or problematic behaviour at the border as well. So I think it's how you best use the technology in order to make it possible to do the intelligence-based and evidence-based checks. Yes, it does mean training, because you're shifting the roles that people as well of having the digitalised approach. Is it does also mean we can then track when people are leaving the country as well, and whether if they haven't left the country when they were due to, and therefore they're overstaying on their visas. That also allows us to do better and more targeted immigration enforcement action as well.
Thank you. And then just finally, you've touched on ETA. Could you just help us understand how the department is assessing the effectiveness of the ETA system, and in particular, because it's been put to us that the number of people applying for an ETA, the rate of refusal is very, very small. There's a suggestion that the scrutiny in terms of reviewing ETA applicants was not sufficiently rigorous, and that's part of the reason for the very low refusal rate.
Well, obviously the ETAs are for countries which have traditionally been non-visa countries. So they are the countries that we've had trusted relationships with, where there haven't traditionally been problems in the immigration system. And obviously a lot of this is about people coming as tourists in the way that we want people to be able to do so. So I think you wouldn't expect it to operate in the same way or have the same kinds of refusal rates as people who are wanting to come for long-term family reunion, or people wanting to come for long-term visas in a different way. I think our understanding is that the assessments, other countries, for example, New Zealand or the USA, have similar levels of refusals as well. So we will keep monitoring this, and obviously wherever we have any abuse of the system, we'll be ready to take action as well. And you'll know, just as an example of this, the areas that we've already had, we've made some visa changes around Colombia, Jordan and Trinidad and Tobago in over the last 9 months, have been areas where different changes to the visa regime had meant we were suddenly getting a big increase in asylum applications, even though nothing particular in those countries had changed. And so we tightened the rules for each of those countries in order to prevent misuse of the asylum system. So anywhere where we have any kinds of challenge or problem, we will continue to monitor.
Thank you very much.
Just on that, on ETA, when this committee looked at arrangements for ETA and the phased rollout of it, we were particularly concerned that information about it didn't seem to be available in anything other than English, and we recommended that there be publication in a range of other languages. Has that happened?
I would need to check and come back to the committee to be sure, but we've granted about 5.5 million ETAs, and there is no indication that people are struggling to apply. But I would think it has, but I can't be certain, and we will confirm for the committee.
Okay, we look forward to hearing from that. Lord Henley.
Home Secretary, thank you very much. The government's made it clear that they want to end the use of asylum hotels by the end of this Parliament, and that's a very specific time, rather than one that can be subject to seasonal interpretation. As you know, we recently saw David Bolt, the Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, and he expressed some doubts as to whether the department would be able to achieve that. He said, for example, frankly, I do not think it will be achieved. There is simply not sufficient housing stock to be able to deal with the sorts of numbers that there are in the system. Are you confident that it can be achieved, and how will you go about achieving it?
So we're determined to do this. The asylum hotels, I think, are completely inappropriate, incredibly expensive, but they also reflect the fact that the backlog in the system is just far too high. We should not have this many people in supported asylum accommodation or in the asylum system for so long in the first place. So there's a series of things that we are doing. The most important thing is to clear the backlog. The situation we inherited last July, it was chaotic because as a result of the Illegal Migration Act, the previous government had effectively halted asylum appointments and decision-making. So we had that final 3 months in the run-up to the general election, just plummeting numbers of asylum decisions and appointments being made, sort of 70 to 80% reduction in the decision-making. That meant we inherited a rising backlog, and we've had to deal with that, and that has we've had to substantially increase the initial decision-making. We now, in the last quarter, was the second highest 3-month period for decision-making since 2002, and was more than double the rate of initial decision-making that we had in those 3 months before the election. So that is the first stage, to just hugely speed up the initial decision-making, just take a lot more decisions to start clearing that backlog. Secondly, we will need to reform the appeals system. The Border Security Bill going through Parliament at the moment does include the new statutory timetable, 24-week timetable around supported appeals. And the Ministry of Justice is expanding capacity in the asylum appeals system. We are looking at ways to go further on that because it's the appeals backlog that is now increasing because that system was just not fit for purpose. The next area we're looking at is tighter management of the contracts. You'll be aware we have removed Stay Belvedere from the asylum contract supply chain, and also looking at working with local authorities on more appropriate accommodation as well, working with local authorities on different ways to be able to do that. But the fundamental thing is we've got to get the overall numbers in the system down. And then a final thing that we are looking at as well is stronger checks on asylum applications in the first place. So the fact there's been a big increase in applications from people who arrived on a visa, including on a student visa, even where there have been no changes in their circumstances since they arrived, no changes in the circumstances in their home country since they arrived. In those circumstances, we are looking at how we prevent some of that misuse of the system, and also how we make sure that there are really robust checks done on whether or not people actually need asylum accommodation. If they have been here working or studying, they should have funding to support themselves and shouldn't be going into asylum accommodation.
As of the 31st of March, and the figures I have, there were something a little over 50,000 open asylum cases. When will you have the next set of figures, and are they coming down?
So the numbers are coming down. The numbers in the waiting for initial decisions are coming down. The challenge at the moment is around making sure that we also can have the same progress around appeals, and that's why we're introducing these appeal reforms as well. But yes, the numbers in the overall system waiting for initial decisions are significantly coming down.
We publish statistics quarterly.
So the June figures will be coming out
in August, I think. So we published at the end of May, the next one soon.
Thank you very much.
Baroness Buscombe.
Thank you. Home Secretary, I want to highlight the issue of organised crime, much of which we now know is intrinsically linked to the illegal boats and supported by a really powerful and dangerous network of criminal gangs who are here and now established in every part of the UK, in our villages, our towns and our cities. It's something that goes unspoken, but it's here and very much alive. The gangs comprise, we don't know how many asylum seekers who've leaked out of the hotels, calling themselves barbers, cigarette and sweet vendors, etc. And they're operating illegally with alacrity. We're all watching it daily, as the risk to them is so negligible and the rewards are so great. The Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration has told us that, and I quote, in respect of organised crime, the best we can do is deflect it to something else that you are less concerned about, rather than eradicate it. Home Secretary, do you agree?
So I just don't accept that we should accept the presence of organised crime in our communities. I think that what you see is organised crime expands if they are given free rein to do so and if it is too easy for them to do so. And I think you're right to say that we've had organised immigration crime, I think has been let off the hook for far too long. We've seen that in terms of the way in which the gangs have been operating across Europe, and they have exploited lack of coordination between governments across Europe. But we've also seen organised advantage, I think, of lax enforcement around the high street as well. We've seen that because there really hasn't been a strong enough response on illegal working, hasn't been, I think, strong enough policing, neighbourhood policing in our town centres. I think town centres have been too easy territory for organised crime to operate, whether that be around the organised shop theft or whether it be around organised taking over different high street locations as well. So the first thing that we did straight after the general election was substantially increase the resources for immigration enforcement. So an additional 1,000 people working in different areas of immigration enforcement. That has led to, we've managed to run a 50% increase in raids and arrests for illegal working. And I think it's between a 20 and 30% increase in penalties now going through the system for both employers and illegal workers as well. We need to keep going, and we are setting out and working through different ways to increase the targeting. We're just drawing up a new focus around particularly the gig economy operations, where there's a new measure as part of the Borders Bill, which is about closing the loophole on the gig economy and meaning that employers need to do employment checks there. And then also, I think the increasing neighbourhood policing, I think, is part of this as well, because we've got the 3,000 additional neighbourhood police that we're putting into place the course of this year. We've said that the focus for police forces this year needs to be town centres. If you've got police forces and neighbourhood police in town centres, then that's when they will get the intelligence about what is going wrong in particular locations as well.
Because the thing is, I mean, my local police community support officer, she's fantastic. Yeah. She's covering an area of 120 square miles. How can she do this? And we know that these people in organised crime, they go to quiet areas and no one dare say anything. The Equality Act, I think, needs to be looked at because people are terrified of saying anything. Otherwise, they're accused of being racist or whatever. The other issue, Home Secretary, have you looked at landlords and their role in terms of allowing people to rent who are have criminal intent or there's any suspect of crime? Because that used to be strict liability if one actually was renting to somebody, for example, to do with illegal drugs. Strict liability. None of that is happening at the moment as far as the public can see and feel.
What I would say is crime is crime. Wherever it is taking place, whoever is undertaking the crime, and in terms of policing needs to go after the crime without fear or favour. And we also have the way in which the e-visa system works is that landlords are supposed to do checks on people's right to be in the UK in the same way that employers do and can as well. You'll be aware that we're bringing in a sort of tighter regime around landlords more widely separately as part of the work the MCHLG is doing. But our particular enforcement focus right now is around the illegal working.
Right. Lord Dobbs.
Home Secretary, I wonder if I could just raise a related issue. Do you think identity cards would be helpful to you across the whole range of topics that we're talking about?
Well, one of the things we're trying to do is effectively roll out digital ID for non-UK and Irish citizens. So the way in which the e-visas system works is the e-visa is a digital footprint that will say to anybody, can be checked at any point by immigration enforcement, can be checked by an employer or a landlord, whether somebody has lawful status here in the UK and whether they have the right to work as well. What we're now working to do is to link that and integrate that with the asylum and immigration biometric system, which not only has the biometrics from the e-visas system, but also has the biometrics from Western Jetfoil and for people who are arriving and then applying into the asylum system. And that then gives immigration enforcement, if they have the right biometric equipment, the ability to do fingerprints and biometric checks on the spot and effectively put in place a digital ID system that then allows for much swifter enforcement, much swifter information and intelligence to be able to take action. We link that with the broader system around the entry and exit checks and the digitalisation of the border, and link those things together. That will give us a much better, more effective, data-driven way in which to ensure that the rules are properly respected and enforced.
Very interesting that in your response, the protection of the individual and identity and so on is clearly very important. I just wonder why it is that this government hasn't considered making the theft of somebody's identity illegal, because it currently isn't. Perhaps you'll look at that, but well, I'll leave that for another day. Lord Bark.
Thank you very much, Lord Chair. Home Secretary. I was a Police and Crime Commissioner for 5 years, you may or may not know. And so my question is going to be basically 3 questions around policing. If I can start with this one, many argue that there's been a crisis in confidence in policing in general in recent years. And I refer to a speech you made in November last year, you'll remember it, to the NPCC, APCC, a gathering in London, where, and this is a quote from you, our precious tradition of policing by consent is in peril. Do you still think that it is in peril? And if so, why such? And is it something to do with the lack of confidence among different communities in our country?
So I think this is a really important issue, and thank you, by the way, for your service as a Police and Crime Commissioner as well. When we set up the Safer Streets mission, the Safer Streets mission for the government effectively has 2 halves. So on harm and on confidence. So halving serious violence, an ambition to halve violence against women and girls and to halve knife crime over the next 10 years. And alongside that, the mission to restore and rebuild confidence in policing and the criminal justice system. So on the harm side, the plans we have around the new violence against women and girls strategy, around the changes we've made to take knives off the streets, and on the confidence side, at its core, I think, is about putting neighbourhood policing back on the streets to rebuild confidence. So you're right, confidence in policing has fallen in recent years, and I think that's for a series of reasons. Firstly, I actually think it's about the disappearance of visible policing. So the fact that neighbourhood policing, visible policing has just been decimated. If you don't know your local police officer, if you don't ever see a police officer, you are much less likely to have confidence that the police will be there when you need them. So that confidence issue, and also the taking action on those kinds of crimes that are too often treated as low level, so like the shop theft or like the persistent antisocial behaviour in the town centre. If you see that kind of disrespect and crimes being committed in your town centre at the very heart of your local community, and criminals and vandals just getting away with it, you are much less likely to have confidence in policing. Alongside that, we have had obviously a series of just awful cases where, and obviously you'll think of the terrible murder of Sarah Everard, which actually revealed lack of proper vetting standards and standards in the system. So some issues around standards not being addressed, and issues around different communities having different levels of confidence around policing as well. So I think it's been a range of reasons. In order to turn that round, the starting point is restoring neighbourhood policing, 3,000 additional neighbourhood police this year, and focusing on town centre crime. But alongside that, as part of our policing reform white paper due later this year, we will also set out reforms around raising standards in policing across the board as well.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question I want to ask is about the great use of technology. Do you think that carries, in police terms, public support? And do you believe, for example, the use of live facial recognition should be placed perhaps on a statutory footing?
I think there are areas where the public might be shocked to know how far back some of the technology is that policing has been using. If you think that the Police National Computer is 50 years old, that means it was modern and whizzy when I was 5. So it's, we've got a problem with the technology, and I think a lot of work to do to upgrade technology. And so that's why I think the work being done, not only around the Police National Computer, around Airwave, and also around looking at new ways to use things like facial recognition and AI. We strongly want to develop the use of AI, and that can be everything from reducing bureaucracy, on things like the redacting information that's needed before a case goes to court, through to using AI to support intelligence as well. Specifically on the facial recognition, some forces have now developed some very effective examples of using live facial recognition. We want to see more be able to do that. There is a concern many forces have about not having a proper governance framework in place to allow them to do that. And so the Policing Minister, Diana Johnson, has been doing a lot of work with police forces and with stakeholders on drawing up what that new governance framework should be in order to be able to allow forces to more effectively use the facial recognition.
Thank you for that.
Just for greater clarity, the question was, do you believe it should be put on a statutory footing? So if we take the current deployment of live facial recognition in Croydon, where for the first time the cameras are going to be fixed to street furniture, that isn't covered under common law, and it's not covered by the one case that's discussed these issues. So there is real question as to whether there is legality for what is happening in Croydon. Don't you think that needs to be sorted out?
So we do think a new framework is needed. So the Policing Minister has been currently drawing up what that framework will look like, and we hope to be able to set out the way in which we would do that more frequently. So we will update you as soon as we possibly can and write to you with the details on that. But we do think you need a new, proper, clear governance framework in order to be able to give forces the confidence to use it with the right standards in place.
All right, my final question to you, Home Secretary, is this. We've all heard, given recent comments from really very senior police officers about the case for reorganisation of police services, police forces in this country, in England and Wales. We're looking forward to the white paper on policing, of course, coming out, we hope, later this year. What's your thinking about this at the moment, and will the forthcoming white paper perhaps include some comment on this?
So the policing reform white paper is being drawn up very closely with policing. We have senior police officers have been seconded in to work with the Home Office on drawing up the white paper. And this has been done very closely in conjunction with both police chiefs, also mayors and police and crime commissioners and others. Been a lot of consultation and development on different areas. We'll obviously set out the full detail when the white paper is produced, but it certainly does need to address the issue that we've got the 43 different forces making 43 different sets of decisions around key things, even issues like around digital structures, digital capabilities being made 43 different times. Some of this is around efficiency and procurement efficiency, if forces can work together in a different way, or if we have national coordination and leadership. Some of it is about the effectiveness of services, for example, forensics or helicopters, air support services as well. And some of it is also about looking again at what should be done at local level, including at very local level with neighbourhood policing, what should be done at force level, what should be done at regional level, and what should be done at national level. So it will include setting out a new national centre of policing to be able to both drive standards but also to be able to draw together some of those capabilities that really should be provided nationally rather than be negotiated between 43 different forces and sometimes 86 different decision makers.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Baroness Burton.
Good afternoon, Home Secretary. Could I just follow on from some of the points that Lord Buck has raised? I mean, firstly, we talk about, and it was very welcome news that now violence against women and girls is a strategic policing requirement. And so, therefore, on the same footing as terrorism and CSAM, and as we know. But the funding is so radically different. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit to that. And I say that with the deepest respect, given the anniversary that we're in. But really, you know, given that 20% of recorded crime is violence against women and girls, I think that is a big problem.
We run it.
So I have some follow-up questions as well,
yes.
But if we just kick off with that.
So we'll set out the violence against women and girls strategy after the recess. This is the first time we would have done a really comprehensive cross-government strategy as well. So obviously, we're doing a huge amount of work around, from the Home Office led around policing and the criminal justice system and the framework of the law around this. But in order for this to be an effective strategy, it has to go much broader than that. It has to involve education and health and communities and local government and housing and DCIT and science and technology and online issues as well. So this is very much a cross-government strategy that we are drawing up. In terms of the policing, you're completely right. Domestic abuse is both one of the most serious and one of the highest volume crimes that we face across the country. And too often, I think still throughout, whether it's policing, criminal justice system, agencies and organisations, that's issues around coercive control not fully understood and appreciated, and some of those dangers and risks. The new Centre for Public Protection effectively is set up currently in the College for Policing, but to be part of the new National Centre of Policing is a new opportunity to drive much higher standards across the board, and also to ensure that we are properly making this a priority right across police forces. Because one of the things that we have to do, given that we know huge amounts of police resource are in fact used to respond to things like domestic abuse call-outs and so on, but not used effectively enough at the moment. And so here it's, rather than us needing to create an entirely new infrastructure, what we've actually got to do is hugely overhaul and improve the existing systems that we have that are dealing with these crimes, often very terrible crimes, on a daily basis. So the Centre for Public Protection is a way to drive that, but it's not the only way to drive that. Putting the 999 control rooms, having domestic abuse specialists in 999 control rooms, that was part of Raneen's law. That is starting to roll out now across the country. The domestic abuse protection orders starting to roll out across the country. And I was going to say something about the review, obviously, that you did, but you may want to ask about that.
Yes, well, yes. I will do, if you don't mind, a shameless plug. I mean,
you should.
32 recommendations I have given to the government, and many of them are around prevention, because we know there is a very, very strong correlation with violent and barely legal pornography affecting real-life traits. Not least, 38% of women and girls now expect to be strangled during sex. And could you therefore confirm that the happy news that you are going to criminalise depictions of strangulation in pornography, and confirm that for us today?
Yeah, can I just first thank you, Baroness Purser, for doing this really comprehensive review and for highlighting this, because I think there is actually something really horrific about the evidence that you've gathered, the evidence that we've seen separately about the extent to which we are seeing strangulation in sexual relationships and especially in young people and in teenage sexual relationships as well, that this is always dangerous. There is no safe way to do strangulation in sex. It is always dangerous and with incredibly risky consequences. And the way in which this kind of violence has become normalised as a result of what young people are seeing online, I think is quite appalling and really, really deeply troubling. So yes, we will change the law on this. We will ensure that we bring forward an amendment to the Crime and Policing Bill here in the House of Lords as part of its passage in order to criminalise the possession of porn depicting strangulation, suffocating or choking, because it just cannot be normalised. This is dangerous, and I think young women's lives are at risk.
Well, I thank you very much for that. Could I also urge you, though, in the strategy, when it is announced, that there must be the proposals that I put forward for far greater scrutiny and interrogation of the industry, which at the moment sort of operates, basically standards are not there. I would urge you very much, please, to include those recommendations in that strategy. Just sort of moving on very briefly, though, just to keep on the theme of technology, quite a few people have sort of given feedback who work in the Borg arena that the momentum seems to be tailing off just a little bit, and I want to sort of get your reassurance on that, but also the momentum around safer by design technologies, and I think that you talk about working with DSIT, but I think the Home Office has to be far more involved in this, because clearly there is a little bit of a conflict of interest with the growth surge that they're trying to get out of AI, etc., and perhaps the sort of more preventative, being conscious of what harms can come of it, that the Home Office may have a different view on.
So we do expect the issues around the online safety and issues around the impact that that's having on violence against women and girls to be a significant part of the strategy. And that has involved a lot of work. There is also further work that DSIT have been doing directly themselves around online safety issues, and also specific measures like the issue around the online pornography and strangulation that we're bringing forward, obviously, in the Crime and Policing Bill. So we have, I think, a lot of work really underway across the departments. I think you're right to raise this, because I think the pace of technological change makes all of this challenging, and everybody is having to respond to a pace of change that I think none of us anticipated 10 years ago. And that is particularly about the way in which this affects our children. And particularly around the safeguards, around issues around age verification, all of those things, I think are going to become central issues over the next 12 months.
And we have to get ahead of it rather than sort of chasing it down. Chair, would you like me to actually ask the question I was supposed to ask? Yes. The Crime and Policing Bill's in front of us, and VORG, as we've discussed, shop theft, burglaries, robberies, and child sexual exploitation, and many others. How are the policing priorities set, and is it really helpful to speak of priorities given the many, many challenges that the police face, and in reality they're often set at a local level?
Yeah. So we've tried to frame the priority approach in the Safer Streets mission as being about the most serious violence and about confidence. So the most serious violence we have identified as being knife crime and violence against women and girls. So alongside the violence against women and girls strategy, we also have major work underway in terms of tackling knife crimes, particularly among young people, but not only. So we've got a knife-enabled knife-enabled robbery task force that's been working for the last 12 months, working very effectively to reduce knife-enabled robbery in hotspot areas. So that's the issues around the most serious violence. We do need that to be a policing priority. And alongside that, the other set of issues is around confidence. Now, confidence will obviously vary. Confidence issues will vary from area to area of the kinds of crimes, the kinds of circumstances that are undermining confidence. But actually, the big common theme across confidence, really right across the country, is around lack of visible policing, lack of neighbourhood policing. And I think those town centre crimes have become a real common theme across the country. So that is our focus right now. Neighbourhood policing, I think that visible policing, that's where you build, it's the building block of all of the policing around consent. So that will be a central priority throughout the course of the Parliament. We're focusing on town centre crime now, but as the confidence issues, if that becomes a concern around some other area of crime, that means policing need to adapt in order to respond to that. But that's how we framed it. So the priorities for policing are around serious violence and neighbourhood crime, neighbourhood policing. Beyond that, of course, there are the strategic national priorities like counter-terrorism or public order policing, where all police forces have to have that basic capability in place in order to respond to threat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lord Tope.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm very conscious of time now. We turn to prisons in the last our last 5 minutes or so. There's a lot of emphasis now, quite rightly, in reducing prison population. We've had the recommendations from the Independent Sentencing Review on similar grounds. How confident are you that one of the consequences there is going to be even greater pressure on the police service and more particularly the probation service? How confident are you that they're actually going to manage the inevitable consequences of reducing prison size and reducing sentences?
We started here with obviously a prisons crisis that we inherited, and probably the most damaging thing of all, both to public confidence and to public safety, and certainly to the effective work of policing, would have been if we had reached the point where the police could not arrest dangerous offenders because there were simply not the prison places, simply not remand places or custody places to be able to take people to. So I think it will become an essential public safety issue to respond to the prisons crisis. That's obviously what the Lord Chancellor has been doing. That's why we've had the major sentencing review alongside the prison building plan to expand the number of prison places and to strengthen the penalties around non-custodial penalties, strengthen the intelligence monitoring, expanding the work of the probation service. That's obviously led by the Ministry of Justice. We have also worked closely with the Ministry of Justice, particularly on issues around how domestic abuse should be managed, because that raises different kinds of concerns, and we need to make sure that there is swift response to, for example, the breaching of orders as well. So we've been working very closely with them to make sure that those proper risk assessments are being developed and are in place in order to make sure that people are paying the price for their crimes, that people are punished for their crimes, and also that the system is working as effectively as possible to keep victims safe.
I think as a committee we're strongly in favour of reducing the prison population in a responsible way. I think equally we have considerable concerns about the capacity, particularly of the probation service, as it is, of actually being able to cope with the inevitable consequences of that.
I mean, I suppose I should be clear that we are expanding the number of prison places. So the prison building programme is still about expanding the number of places. It will take time. So that's still making sure that there is a proper, strong prison system in order to be able to make sure people face proper penalties. The Ministry of Justice obviously leads on the support for the probation service, but the Chancellor has set out additional funding for the probation service in order to be able to respond and to make sure we've got systems in place.
You give me a lead into my next questions. How are you actually working with the MOJ to ensure that there is a consistent message across government about both the need to and the consequences of reducing offending? Reducing prison.
There's been a lot of work underway throughout. So the Safeguarding Minister, Jess Phillips, for example, has worked very closely at every point in the response over the last 12 months. So not just the most recent work around the sentencing review, but at every stage in terms of what safeguards or checks needed to be in place, and we're continuing to do so. But I'll maybe turn to Richard, who is the lead for the overall Safer Streets mission, which covers both the confidence in policing and confidence in the criminal justice system as well, who can set out a bit more about the way the Home Office and MOJ have been working together.
Yeah, thanks. It's worth saying, as the Home Secretary said, we have an exceptionally close working relationship with the Ministry of Justice. They are effectively a kind of co-lead on an aspect of the Safer Streets mission because, as the Home Secretary said, confidence in the criminal justice system is one of the two confidence halves. In addition to what the Home Secretary said about Jess Phillips, the Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls, and the Home Office working very closely with the police. Alex Davis-Jones, who's our opposite number, the Minister for Safeguarding and Ministry of Justice, they've done a lot of joint work together with senior police officers with the Prison and Probation Service to be able to understand both the sequence of releases that have been underway so far, the early release schemes, but also the specific design for how the government will respond to David Gauke's sentencing review. We're also, of course, expecting shortly Brian Levison's courts review, and we're working closely with the Ministry of Justice on that as well.
I think his report's due out. Home Secretary, there's lots more we would love to ask you. It perhaps will be helpful to you to know that in the next week or so we will be publishing a very detailed report on prisons and our thoughts on prisons. We do so in the light of the Chief Inspector of Prisons, whose report has just come out today. We're also conscious that part of the problem of prisons is because of delays in the criminal justice system, and the Brian Levison report and recommendations may or may not prove helpful. The one area that is particularly relevant to this committee's next inquiry, where we're going to be looking at tagging, really ties in at the end to the question Lord Choate was asking about the ability of the police to be able to respond to potential problems, breaches of orders and so on, that may come because of increased number of community sentences and increased tagging. And I don't know whether within your department you've been looking at that issue, and if anybody has, we would like to know who to speak to about that as a matter of urgency. That's a little plug for what we're doing. But Secretary of State, we're enormously grateful to you. You've covered a huge amount of ground in a very short period of time. You've indicated clear understanding of many very different roles, and we're enormously grateful for that. However, you have pointed to a very large amount of, quote, work in progress. So I hope we can get you to agree that in about a year's time you would be willing to come back before us so we can actually see what work in progress has led to. So I hope that will be possible. But I know the committee will have found it entirely useful. I'm sure those people listening in, watching in, will have found it very helpful. So thank you to you. Thank you to your two officials as well. But order, the public evidence session is now concluded.
Thank you, Lord Foster. Thank you.